make up something off the top of my head. Welcome to Worthing Skeptics. Thank you very much for coming. I'm John Richards. I send you the emails and sometimes I forget to drop. Whoops. Sorry about that. But tonight is about a very hot issue, as you know. And there are various ways of regarding this. I think probably skepticism is more or less gone. I think 99% of scientists agree that we have climate change approaching. And people like James Delingpole, have you heard of him?
Yes.
He was the rogue journalist who made a lot of money making up stories out of a few emails that were hacked, and the director of the Norwich climate unit at the university there lost his job temporarily. He's back in post, thank heaven. But this journalist is just somebody who, he's a fake news journalist and makes a lot of money selling nonsense to newspapers who sell their wares to people who like to read nonsense. Sorry, that's the way the world is at the moment.
He writes for the Times.
So,
What are you saying about the people who buy the Times?
He's a tabloid more of a...
He writes for the Times.
Does he?
Yes.
Oh, I think he'll write for anybody who'll pay him.
Don't most journalists?
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, tonight we have our local expert, ta-da! Michelle Furtado, Furtado, who is a member, a lead person in Worthing Climate Action
Network, yeah.
She's going to give us a presentation, then we'll take a little break, and then we'll reconvene and we'll do some question and answer. Okay? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So my name's Michelle. I am I'm a sustainability consultant in real life, and I'm an artist and I'm an activist. So I do a few different volunteer roles around Ada and Worthing. So I'm going to talk about climate change, a little bit about carbon footprints to kind of get a grip on how carbon is distributed in the world. We'll talk about protest and the different types of protests, kind of, and also what's going on locally, because I think that's important, because we're doing quite a lot locally. Can you all hear me at the back and everything? Good. Fabulous. So, this graph is, when you go onto climate on the NASA website, this is what comes up basically, and this is a graph that shows, really simply, what the issue is in terms of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So at year zero is 1950. That is when they started properly measuring atmospheric carbon dioxide in stations around the globe. This data goes back 800,000 years along the bottom, and this nice curve here is from carbon dioxide readings that they've taken from ice core samples that go back 800,000 years. So at 1950, that level there is when they started picking up the fact that carbon dioxide in our atmosphere was significantly higher. Other times previous to that, it's been on this kind of nice curve, up and down. That has allowed for ice ages to come and go. It's allowed for arable crops growing in Greenland. All that stuff that we hear about, that's all within that parameter there. When we get to 1950 and they start measuring it, very quickly, by 1970s, they realise that there's quite a major issue going on. We're burning fossil fuels, that's releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and they really can start pinpointing significant increases in carbon dioxide. We're currently at 415-ish parts per million. We want to be around, or we wanted to be around, the 350 parts per million. We went past that a long, long time ago, but that's why there's an organisation called 350.org that campaigns on climate, because that's the level that they were looking at when they set themselves up. So, that is the key kind of issue.
Into that a minute, because I'm a teacher, as you know, retired now, but when I was a boy at school myself, I was told that the carbon dioxide concentration was 0.03%. 50 years later, you know, I'm teaching that it's 0.04. So that's an increase of a third in my lifetime. It's a big increase.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's increased in my lifetime as well. So I'm 42 years old, basically. When I was 1, the great and the good came together globally, and they started talking about these issues and really started looking at what the problems were and thinking about the environment. And we had lots of conventions all around the world, and the Brundtland report, which was a large UN report, defined sustainability. So this is the kind of accepted definition of sustainability that we work to. This has not happened in my lifetime. We have not thought about the issue over the last 40 years. It's basically been known about, but they concentrated on the ozone layer and the hole in the ozone layer, because that was a much quicker win. It was CFC carbons, they stopped them, and the hole is closing up. So we've cracked that globally. Fossil fuel organisations and companies basically were quite supportive of the climate science in the 70s, and that changed during the 80s when the ozone layer thing came into the fore. So we have known for 40 years, the great and the good, for 40 years we've known about this. We've not slowly transformed our economies away from fossil fuels over that time. We have gone crazy on them. Yeah, we have changed into this massive consumer population. So the current international pledges that we have within the Paris Agreement will take us to 3 degrees of warming. Scientists are saying that we need to stick at 1.5 degrees of warming to stay within a climate system that is relatively habitable. There will still be some quite significant changes to our climate system. There was an article in the paper the other day that was talking about how the climate change at the moment is supercharging Indian Ocean weather systems, and it's creating massive monsoons on the Indian subcontinent and huge drought in Australia, and that's likely to kind of continue going forward. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So in my day job, I have for a long time talked about this issue, and this is a bugbear of mine, so I'm going to put it out there for everybody. This up here, this nice little 3 thing, is a Venn diagram of where they put the social, the environmental, social and economic 3 kind of tenets of sustainability. So they put them together. There's differences and payoffs and trade-offs between the 2 of them if we're trying to go into particular areas, but there's a sweet spot in the middle that they say that is truly sustainable. That, unfortunately, is not how we exist on this planet. This is the one that I want people to start thinking of how we are. The environment, where we live on that planet, that little planet there in the midst of space, that is our home, and that's it. We are a society within the planet, okay? And we generate the economy. It's not the other way around. The economy is not generating us and ourselves. We generate the economy. So we've taken from the environment and ignored that. We've taken and extracted resources willy-nilly, and the economy has grown into some huge oversized bubble where we all feel like we're absolutely trapped in this consumptive capitalist system. So that's kind of, this is a much better model to start thinking about how we can frame sustainability going forward. So carbon footprints. This is important because this is how everybody's measuring targets and things against carbon footprinting at the moment. Everything we do has a carbon footprint. So if I make a cup of tea, the carbon footprint involves me going to the shop, buying a tea bag, all the lighting and everything in that shop to actually get it home. It's boiling the water in the kettle, and that is my cup of tea. None of the cost of that, the production in India or wherever the tea is from, is actually taken into account currently as it stands in this country. So our targets, they exist, and it was 80% against 1990 levels in the original Climate Change Act. We're now at zero carbon by 2050. That is only taking into account our production costs in this country. It doesn't take into account any imported consumption emissions into this country. And we buy a lot of stuff, lots of stuff. Carbon is not equally distributed. So this came up in a meeting the other day when I was talking. Somebody was saying, you know, poor people, it's known, they eat rubbish food that has a higher carbon footprint, etc., etc. Doesn't quite work like that. Poor people are poor. They buy less, they live in smaller houses, they don't go on holiday as much, they don't do as many activities, they don't have very fancy foods or anything. They're poor. They have about a third of the carbon emissions that rich people do in this country. This is research by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. This is research by Oxfam. This looks at global poverty levels and carbon emissions as well. And they're basically showing that the 10% of the world's poorest hardly emit anything. Now, my husband's Portuguese. We went to Portugal for the first time in a couple of years to see our family out there this summer. That's 4 of us. I carbon offset my flight and doubled it and gold standard it because of the guilt. It still doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. That single flight for the 4 of us was more emissions emitted than 24 African countries per capita emissions for a whole year. That one flight. So that's huge amount, and that's ongoing all the time in the Western society. When we look at like a European picture, you can see we import loads and loads. We import far more in terms of our food and stuff like that than, say, France or Spain or any of these other countries. You're not going to be able to see this.
That shows the southwest is the highest.
Yeah, it's likely to be because of poor transport systems down there. So transport is a massive emitter of carbon dioxide. So those kind of things are huge in particular areas. You won't be able to see this really well, but it's a Guardian piece of research that they did, basically. So when we look globally, people will say quite often that what's the point of us doing anything? China is building new coal plants all the time, etc., etc. And they do have a whopping great carbon footprint when you look at it in terms of the nation. When you take that down and follow this line, to there, that little one there, that's China on a per capita basis. So the actual consumption carbon emissions per capita in China are tiny. They're a fraction in comparison with other countries. You know, some of these, like Gibraltar, is a huge one down there. Virgin Islands, the US are Virgin Islands, another massive one. So carbon is not equally distributed, and we also have to think, we buy so much stuff from these kind of, China, Asia, all those kind of import nations, that actually we're contributing to their carbon production costs in their countries, but that's not taking account onto our country's carbon emissions. So that's how it kind of sits in terms of where carbon is. This was from a net zero report that a consultancy did, and they looked at the Committee on Climate Change's latest report about how we could achieve net zero, basically. And the Committee on Climate Change do believe we can achieve it. We just need that political will at structural level to start changing things. So this is just kind of an average household emissions, with all the different things in there. We've come down a lot already because we've done some significant work in terms of sustainability. If you look at like our waste levels, for example, that's when we didn't do much recycling, and then we did do loads of recycling, so that's really good. This is looking at the Climate Change Act, so that's 80% levels. The 97% that was one of the recommendations in the Committee on Climate Change about how to achieve. And then they said, well, if we're going to go 97%, we might as well go 0, and that's the net zero up there. Now, aviation is still a component of the household emissions. Aviation currently is not included in our countries, or pretty much any country around the world, carbon, oh God, I can't think of the word, sorry, I'm so tired. Carbon kind of calculations for the countries. Aviation isn't included. So that in itself is quite a significant chunk still of a net zero. I'm kind of, there's some things, boards over there that we've been weaving around to different events as well, and there's some pictures and infographics. Have a look at them at the break. And there's one about the carbon being released from Gatwick and what aviation expansion in this country will do to our carbon budget. So it's a little bit scary. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is kind of stuff that we can do ourselves individually. I've got some leaflets actually, because we did with Worthing Climate Action, we did a climate conversations event. We took over Colonnade House. So these are kind of things that we can do in our own house and life. A lot of the stuff that we're trying to achieve though is structural changes that need to be done. Now I worked with NHS Trust for quite a long time, and there was a nice piece of research that the Sustainable Development Unit for the NHS did. It was looking at, this is the latest one that they've done, this is health and social care, so the whole of the NHS and all of social care, its carbon footprint as it exists at the moment. And the Climate Change Act, which is only a 80% target figure, is taking us on this orange curve coming down here. And if you'll note, that's a 2050 target as well. So if we're looking at 2030, the curve is going to be much more dramatic. Okay, so there's some really significant changes that need to happen. So with all of that exists at the moment, why are we protesting? Why is there a protest going on? Myself and Emma from Worthing Climate Action went up to the launch of Extinction Rebellion in October 2018. It had been going around on the environmental networks and there was a real buzz about it. It felt like something new and something different. Their focus is on non-violent direct action, and they will use disruptive tactics. And their three main objectives, what they're asking government to do, is tell the truth about how serious this issue is, and it's serious. Act now, they want net zero by 2025. Achievable, possibly, but only with vast amounts of money and massive behaviour change and thought from us as a population. And they want to go beyond politics. They want to have citizens' assembly. So they want this kind of makeup, not the kind of people I talk to on a regular basis, which is lovely environmentalists, nice green people, that's all lovely. We need Joe Public to come here and say, okay, forget the issue, let's try and work out some palatable solutions to these kind of problems. Protest is nothing new in itself. Greenpeace has been protesting for donkey's years, and indigenous populations across the world are right at the front line of protest. They protest dams in the Amazon, they protest illegal logging. There is currently a Global Witness report that's saying that they reckon about 4 Earth defenders every week are killed to protect their homes. So the protest movement, and there's a huge, it's our right to protest. It's not a kind of, recent thing at all. It's a long-term thing, but to be fair, and I think Greenpeace would quite freely admit this themselves, they've done a lot of protests, it's not actually done much good. So we're kind of, doing stuff like protest has to be part and parcel of it. And Greta Thunberg predated the Extinction Rebellion beginnings. She started striking outside of the school, and that has blown up into a huge global movement. And with that, the Extinction Rebellion, and with the Youth for Strikes and the global strikes, there is a real energy now to the climate movement that hasn't been for 40 years. My entire lifetime, they could have sorted this out for me, so that I could look my children and think, great, you've got a future. And as opposed to me watching my insects and stuff that I loved from my childhood, absolutely, you know, all the wildlife in my garden is gone. Yeah, I don't see hedgehogs unless they're squashed. I hardly ever see a slowworm anymore. Frogs and stuff just aren't. I actually have to go bug hunting with my children to hunt the bugs. They're not just there in my face like they were in my childhood. So this kind of new environmental movement's created a real energy that has kind of, it makes me feel heartened, to be fair. I'm sitting here talking to you, and I wouldn't be, quite frankly, if this stuff hadn't been going on. So, it's not without controversy though, yes? There was the Bristol incident. I'm sure people might remember that. So there was a guy who phoned into the Bristol radio station, and he was saying that he wasn't able to get through to the hospital, and his father had died whilst he was stuck in traffic whilst the Extinction Rebellion protest was going on. They interviewed that girl, and she was crying because that is horrific. You know, I've lost my mum and dad in the last 2 years. I know exactly how hard that is to be in that position of grief. However, at the same time, she's saying she shouldn't be standing there having to do this. This should have happened 40 years ago. So there is generally a policy within Extinction Rebellion to let ambulances and any other kind of, you know, emergency vehicles through. In fact, I've been told earlier today that apparently they actually, the ambulances will drive towards the Extinction Rebellion because they know that they will let through and there's no other traffic on the road, they actually get there faster. So that was one of the controversies. There was also this incident, which was the Canning Town incident. What was interesting about this, they put a shout out within the Extinction Rebellion networks, and protests have been going on. This was kind of right at the end of their 2-week action in London. And they were saying, should this action go ahead? And about 80% of Extinction Rebellion people themselves did not think that this was a good idea. Now, the group that went ahead with it was a Christian subset of Extinction Rebellion, and they felt that it was their moral duty to be disruptive, because what is likely to happen unless we actually take this action is far, far worse than a few upset commuters. Now, that doesn't, you know, it doesn't necessarily sit with everybody like that, but that was how they felt at that time and what they felt that they should have, you know, need to do. Now, it was obviously distressing. Extinction Rebellion is set up specifically as a non-violent direct action organisation, okay? We've had the training, they're quite specific about this. You know, we come at this from a place where we love our planet, we love our humanity, but I don't want to see things happen that my children and my niece and all her peer group are going to have to live with. I don't want to see that. So we're coming at it from a position of love. However, there are still arguments where the people where they actually went to, Canning Town, it's generally a kind of multi-ethnic area. There was issues about actually who are you targeting here, because you're not targeting wealthy people or the bankers or DEFRA, although they had done that in previous actions throughout London. They were targeting, you know, people who are just trying to get to work, they're in 0 hours contract, and they want to put food on the table for their kids, and I get that, I really do get that. And that, I think, is why most people within the movement were not happy with that particular action. They still felt morally obliged that they needed to do that personally. So, despite the backlash, it actually raised the profile of Extinction Rebellion. Again, I mean, all publicity, you know, all bad publicity is good publicity. They got lots more requests for interviews during those periods of time. So yes, controversial, yes, disruptive, maybe not getting the right people.
Was this the story of people climbing on top of trains to...
At Canning Town, yeah. At about, I think it was about 6:30 in the morning or something they did it. It was quite early. It was, you know, it's not a kind of particularly wealthy area. And that's one of the other arguments that's been levelled against the Extinction Rebellion. Is they ask people to sign up to, okay, who can be arrested? So I run my own business, I've spoke to my husband, and he says I can be arrested. That's fine, so I can be arrested. That's great. But one of the arguments levelled against Extinction Rebellion is that it's easy for me as a white person to be arrested. Actually, if you're looking to have a diverse movement which takes in lots of different people, it's not so easy as a black and minority ethnic person to be arrested. That's a whole different kettle of fish. So you don't have to be an arrested person, but they're open to these voices. They recognise a movement is not one single, it's a guiding principles movement, but it has got lots of personalities and opinions within that movement. So there are likely to be issues that don't sit right with the public. My sister can't stand all of this. My sister, she does not like it at all. She doesn't like the arduousness of it. She feels it's really, not the best way to go about things. But at the same time, they've had 40 years. They've had my whole life to sort this out. The science has not changed on this issue. All they've done is made the models for the climate weather watch better. So they've added cloud cover and they've added sea levels and they've added all these other things, but they haven't changed the basic fact. We're burning fossil fuels, CO2 is going into the atmosphere, and the climate is changing. So this is all kind of issues. So what's happening locally? So I'm part of the fantastic Worthing Climate Action Network, of whom Emma is the chair over there, so you've got two for the price of one this evening. We have been, primarily, we asked West Sussex County Council to divest their portion of their pension fund from fossil fuels, which they've currently got about £200 million in Shell and other fossil fuel companies, and put that anywhere else, quite frankly, but basically divestment. That's our big thing. Again, it's another tactic within the protest movement that's worked before in terms of morals and how we need to change our planet. We don't get very far with that, I have to be fair. We've talked to the pension panel, we've written multitudes of letters. We're currently, our chief research guru, Robert, has just written a 16-pager, fully referenced, with a whole load of quotes from the financial people talking about how they need to take action. So that's going off to West Sussex County Council, and hopefully we'll get another letter back, and this one might be positive. So we have also done a whole variety of other stuff, basically. We've done climate cake stalls, that was good fun. We brought loads of cakes down and we talked to people about climate change while we were dishing out cakes, all homemade, that was quite good. Nice sunny day for it. We got involved with the Global Climate Change Action Theatre project, which was going on. An artist ran this project. We were one of only 2 places in the whole of the UK that actually did this little show or community setup and volunteered. I built a 3-metre long life-size Atlantic bluefin tuna because I read the poem about the tuna, the ode to the tuna, so I thought it would be a good idea to build that in my 1-bed flat. Husband wasn't quite pleased, kids were a bit worried in the morning. We also do other practical stuff. So I read about a refill project which started in Bristol. I read about it in The Guardian. I thought, oh, that's a good idea. We can do that here. So we all agreed, and for about a year, our volunteers wandered up and down High Street and got all the cafes and other venues to sign up, and they were all too willing to do it. And then about a year later, we got some money from Southern Water because Refill had started speaking to the strategic bods and it slowed out. And so we did a nice big Refill launch, and that's all still going on, so all the way down. Refill Shoreham started up, and Refill Lancing started up as well, so that's kind of all dribbled through. So, and there's now an Extinction Rebellion Worthing group as well. We did a couple of sessions of training with the Brighton lot. I'm on the WhatsApp group, but I don't actually get involved in that side of stuff. I've got enough on my plate, so I'm going to say no to that one, but they're doing some really interesting creative kind of interventions in the urban landscape, so keep an eye out for those. And what was I going to say? I can't remember. Oh yes, strategic work with the council. That's why I'm keeping out of Extinction Rebellion as well. So we are working with the most incredible sustainability manager at Adrian Worthing Councils. They've declared a climate emergency, and they are wanting to get Adrian Worthing Council itself down to zero carbon by 2030, which is fantastic. We then need to look at the kind of wider area. So we're planning for next year, as volunteers with Transition Town Worthing, a kind of large-scale community mobilisation event, basically. We've got Isabella Tree coming down from the Nepp Estate to talk about rewilding. We're going to have some, we're trying to get some kind of national level speakers to really get people fired up, and then we're going to have some spaces that is going to look at different kind of areas: energy, transport, waste, ecology, community spirit and ethos. And we're going to have these kind of different spaces where people can feed in their ideas about what we can actually do, and whether we can kind of create this framework that sits alongside Adrian Worthing Councils, but we can lever in funding for this in future. You know, if there's new groups like Cycle People want to do a cycle takeover day, I would love them to do that. I would love to cycle. Okay, I'm the worst cyclist in the world. I get nervous about being on the road. It really bothers me. So, you know, if there was a cycle takeover day, maybe I would have a bit more confidence to go out there and do cycling in the future. So there's some really good stuff that's happening locally, and this is not just our organisation. There's a lot of organisations doing this as well. My little leaflets back there remind me, and there's a whole load, not exhaustive list basically. And we are going to do the youth strike again. So next Friday, if anybody wants to come and join us, we're going to be outside the town hall from 11 o'clock. And then we're going to head down to Montague Place, and we're going to have an anti-Black Friday swap shop. And that's going to kind of, they had a youth strike before the summer holidays, and this amazing couple of teenagers organised it. It was raining, it was the last day of term, there was 15 of us. We did our march with our megaphones, and we came down to the coast actually, and I bought them all hot chocolate because they were a bit despondent, to be fair, about the turnout on the day. We did it in September, and we got 400 people there. So there's definitely an appetite, and I think that's largely to people like Extinction Rebellion, but really giving us all the kick up the bum, basically.
You don't have to be youth to do it.
Absolutely no way, no. We're trying to get them along, but it's like, you know, pulling teeth sometimes. So yeah, so come along to our swap shop. There's going to be lots of offers and freebies given away. It'll be fun. And that is it. That's my talk. I don't know how long I've spoken to. Not that long,
That was brilliant, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all right.
We'll take a few minutes off so that you can use the bar and toilet, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a discussion.